Look at a map of the world and find Australia. Now try to work out how a human being walked there. You cannot because they did not. Australia has never been connected to Asia by land. Not now, and not during the ice ages when sea levels dropped and huge areas of shelf were exposed. Even at the lowest sea level, with the largest possible land bridges, there is a stretch of open water in the middle that never closes. And yet people were living in Australia around 50 to 65,000 years ago. That is the part that should stop you. Tens of thousands of years before farming, tens of thousands of years before the wheel. Around 45,000 years before anybody set foot in the Americas. Somebody looked at open sea and decided to cross it. Let me lay out exactly how hard the problem is because it is worse than it sounds. During the last ice age, so much water was locked into ice sheets that sea level dropped by well over 100 meters. Southeast Asia became one enormous connected landmass which geologists call Sunda. Australia and New Guinea were joined into a single continent called Sahul. But between those two, the seafloor drops away into deep trenches that no amount of falling sea level can drain. That gap is broadly the line the naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace identified, because the animals on either side are completely different. Even at the best possible moment, crossing from Sunda to Sahul meant island hopping through a chain of islands, and at least one leg of somewhere around 80 to 100 kilometers of open sea. On that leg, for a stretch in the middle, you cannot see where you came from, and you cannot yet see where you are going. You are in open ocean, out of sight of land, with no compass, no chart, and no coastline to follow. Now the frustrating bit. We have no idea what they were on. Not a single boat survives from that period. Wood, bamboo, hide and plant fiber all rot, and we are talking about 50,000 years. The oldest boat ever found anywhere is a hollowed pine log from the Netherlands, and that is only around 10,000 years old. The vessel that crossed to Australia is 40,000 years older than the oldest boat we have ever recovered. So how do we know it happened at all? Because of the destination. The evidence is not the vehicle. The evidence is that people are on the other side. The strongest early date comes from a rock shelter in northern Australia called Majed Bibi, where excavation produced stone tools, grinding equipment, and ground ochre dated to around 65,000 years ago. That date is genuinely argued about. Some researchers think the artifacts may have moved down through the sand and prefer a figure closer to 50,000. Either number still requires an ocean crossing at a time when nobody on Earth was farming anything. So what were they using? The best guess is bamboo. Bamboo grows in enormous quantities across Southeast Asia, it is hollow, it floats extremely well, and it can be cut and lashed with stone tools. A bamboo raft is not elegant, but it is buoyant, stable, hard to sink, and repairable with materials you can carry. People have tested this. An experimental project led by Robert Bednarik built rafts using only Stone Age technology and attempted crossings in Indonesian waters. Some worked. Others were harder than expected, took much longer than predicted, and ran into currents that pushed them badly off course. The honest summary is that it is possible, and that it is genuinely dangerous. Which brings us to the question that actually matters, and the one I find most interesting. Was it an accident? The comfortable story is a fishing party swept out by a storm, clinging to a raft, washing up on a beach. And a single accident like that cannot explain what we see. One or two castaways do not found a population. You need enough people, including enough women of childbearing age, for a group to survive disease, bad luck, and inbreeding across generations. Researchers have modeled this. Work published by Corey Bradshaw and colleagues estimated that founding a viable population across Sahul would have required something on the order of 1,000 or more people, arriving not in a single lucky boatload, but in repeated groups over time. Read that again. Repeated crossings, which means the first successful voyage was followed by others, which means somebody went back, or at least that people kept setting out on purpose. That is not an accident, that is a route, and you can navigate that route without instruments if you know what to look for. Land that is over the horizon still announces itself. Islands generate their own cloud formations, so a stationary cloud in an otherwise moving sky marks land you cannot see. Seabirds fly out to fish in the morning and back to land at dusk, so their evening direction is a bearing. Swell patterns bend around islands in ways a practiced person can feel through the hull. We know these techniques work because they survived. Traditional Pacific navigators used them across thousands of kilometers of open ocean. And in 1976, a navigator named Mao Piailug sailed a traditional canoe from Hawaii to Tahiti using no instruments at all, to prove the knowledge was real. That is a much later culture, And I am not claiming a direct line back 50,000 years. What it proves is simpler and still important. The human sensory toolkit is enough. You do not need technology to cross an ocean. You need to know what the sky and the water are telling you. There is one more case that makes all of this stranger. On the island of Flores in Indonesia, which has been separated by deep water for the whole relevant period, there are stone tools around 1,000,000 years old, and later, the remains of the small hominin Homo floresiensis. Something got across water long before our species existed. Whether that was a deliberate crossing or animals swept out on a raft of vegetation by a tsunami, nobody knows. So, put the picture together. 50 to 65,000 years ago, on a beach in what is now Indonesia, a group of people stood looking at open water with no land visible on the far side. They had no metal, no writing, no maps, no sails as far as we know, and no way to be sure anything was out there at all. And they went anyway. More than once. The first ocean voyage in human history left no wreck, no port, and no record. The only thing it left behind is a continent full of people.